peach and mangoes are like two of my favorite fruits next to cherries and bananas.
Radio Free Innsmouth episode 329. You know, that would have been a really good intro if I had gone with my original plan for this to be the Grimestone Records, Bloody Keep, Curtain Wall, Old Nick, Abysmal Spectre episode. However, listening to all the Brannicald and other assorted Blazebirth Hall stuff I've been doing lately has really put me in the mood for harsher stuff. The kind of stuff that I was getting into around the same time when I was getting into all that Brannicald stuff for the first time way back however many years ago. I'm dying. So you know what? We're going to cover one of those bands. This is, in fact, the long-awaited by some Sacramentary Abolishment episode. If you don't know Sacramentary Abolishment, they're one of the foundational bands for the nowadays rather popular war metal genre. And if you don't know what war metal is, well, it sounds a little something like... You take all the most dissonant, most anti-commercial, most abrasive aspects of late 80s death metal, late 80s black metal, and late 80s grindcore, slam them together, and dramatically increase the intensity of everything. It was sort of an attempt to do for modern black metal what black metal was an attempt to do for early 90s extreme metal in general, kind of like realign the genre to its most anti-commercial and abrasive aspects in the face of what a lot of people saw as overt commercialization. Ironically, or perhaps not so ironically, much like second wave black metal before it, war metal ended up kind of becoming its own sort of trendy thing in itself. When it comes to war metal, I tend to prefer a lot of the bands that influence the origins of the genre to what a lot of people would say is proper war metal nowadays. You know, your Impaled Nazarene, Sarcophagos, Beharits, Blasphemies, Bestial Warlusts, the first album from Blood. You know, now that I think about it, there's a lot of bees in this genre. Sacramentary Abolishment is also from this early era of the genre, maybe a little bit after the originator bands, but definitely an important early band for the war metal scene. I mean, for starters, they're from Canada.
Knock, knock, Randy. Who's there, Randy? Who's fucking there? Water?
Which, along with South America, is generally seen as being the birthplace of modern war metal as we know it today, thanks to the fact that Conqueror and Blasphemy and Revenge are all from there. And Sacramentary Abolishment do have potent genetic connections to Revenge and Conqueror. But even with that being the case, and with everything you know about war metal, Sacramentary Abolishment, particularly on their first album, stand in a league of their own. For starters, their first album, The River of Corticon, has to be one of the most purposefully inaccessible albums ever released by a black metal band. I mean, even the album cover, if you really squint and look at it, you can kind of see some pyramids and a river or a coastline, maybe, but even then that's only if you really turn up the contrast and the brightness a whole bunch. It more just kind of looks like a weird red blur. But yeah, those very hard to see pyramids, and the fact that apparently Corticon is supposed to be a sobriquet for the River Nile, although the only evidence I can find of the Nile being called Corticon or Corticone or however you want to say it is in other interviews with Sacramentary Abolishment. But with all that, apparently there's some sort of Egyptian concept going on here.
I'm Egyptian. Oh, no, you're not. Yeah.
It might be mythical ancient Egyptian. It might be some sort of resurgence of ancient Egypt in the very far-flung future. It's kind of hard to tell with the album's overall narrative. Main thing I could pull out is there's some guy named Amemnon. He's not really fond of some other guy named Quoto, and they're engaged in some kind of metaphysical sorcerous war with each other through magical proxies. But even then, it's kind of hard to tell because it's not really told like a traditional narrative. Rather, each song is sort of a different emotional snapshot of what Amemnon is feeling at the time, couched in a whole bunch of different occult and military linguistic constructions. It's actually very comparable to the weird sort of hard to parse mini concepts that were such a big part of early Cataclysm. And in fact, not only is it lyrically somewhat similar to Cataclysm, but musically this album's also pretty comparable to Cataclysm in certain aspects. I mean, we're not talking about the newer, more metalcore adjacent, mellow death, groove influenced Cataclysm that you hear with stuff like No, we're talking about the earlier, more esoteric, harsh, and structurally bizarre material of Sacramentary's francophone neighbors to the east. Stuff like at least to my ears, I can hear a whole lot of that kind of thing in Sacramentary Abolishment's music. And if you ask me, that's always a good thing, because early Cataclysm fucking slaps, and it's one of the most unexplored, interesting avenues of extreme metal. And if you reinterpret that sort of highly varied composition and conceptual grandeur in storytelling in a more black metal context, you get something pretty similar to early Sacramentary Abolishment, at least to my ears. The drum performance is incredibly important for Sacramentary Abolishment, to the point where when the drummer left, they elected to change the band name to Axis of Advance, because they felt the spirit behind the band had fundamentally changed with that member shakeup. Not to mention the fact that the drummer came up with the band name Sacramentary Abolishment. But the importance of drums is immediately evident because the album starts out with this multiple minute-long ambient drum intro before bringing in guitars and vocals, the performance of which also lends credence to my characterization of River of Corticon as being one of the most purposefully inaccessible albums ever recorded. Because that production is bizarrely quiet, yet noisy, muddy, down-tuned, to the point where it almost seems like it's purposefully masking this album's compositional intricacies. Because despite the fact that this is very early abrasive war metal, there's a lot of almost neoclassical melodicism to the tremolo riffs that are going on here, which contrasts very interestingly with the more percussive death metal-oriented qualities of this music, like the one you're hearing in this transition riff. Nasty fucking groove in this part. One of my favorite riffs on the album. And it does a really good job of linking the more tremolo-picked early sections of this song to the more doomy, almost bolt thrower-ish sort of direction it goes in towards its end. I mean, look at the melody they're overlaying right here. That's some vintage bolt thrower sounding shit. One thing that kind of distinguishes this from a lot of other war metal stuff is its emphasis on structural variability, with each song having a really long winding narrative and a lot of different styles coexisting at once. Like this downright melancholic, soulful sounding lead guitar playing that you're hearing right now. This kind of thing becomes more and more prevalent as the album goes onward, but at the same time, it does a really interesting job of coexisting with some downright savage sounding fusion of black metal and grindcore. Like that riff right there was pretty much equal parts South American 80s black metal and Carcass to my ears. Just a bending, churning morass of all that was extreme about late 80s metal. Going into this part here where it's really showing off how interesting and varied and important to the overall songwriting flow the drum parts are on this album. Also got some really interesting lead guitar kind of reinterpreting a lot of 80s speed metal tropes in a very apocalyptic black metal way, before then bringing in some more of that melancholic melody, leading us into one of the other most notable aspects of this album, that being literal, actual funeral doom. I can hear a lot of modern day war metal fans saying, what the hell is this doing in my war metal? This sounds like Sturgothan or something. Well, actually more appropriately, at least according to a Russian zine interview I read with their bassist and vocalist Verminard, a lot of it stems from Disembowelment, who apparently were a band that the members of Sacramentary Abolishment were actually listening to a lot more than any other black metal or grindcore acts that you would expect them to be listening to at the time of recording The River of Corticon. Incidentally, the early Sacramentary Abolishment interviews are a whole lot of late 90s black metal fun in terms of just how aggressive and hostile they are towards the boundaries of good taste. I mean, if you thought the quote-unquote cavolt black metal tough guys were asshole elitists nowadays, you ain't seen shit compared to how people were back in the day. But getting back to that funeral doom thing, that's another major distinguishing factor of Sacramentary Abolishment, to the point where the longest song on this album, the 9-minute behemoth reassessment of preliminary defensive procedures, is pretty much entirely funeral doom metal type stuff. In fact, I'm going to go out on a limb and say if you're into Disembowelment or early Thurgothan and skepticism and you haven't listened to Sacramentary Abolishment, you're really missing out. This stuff's made for you. Again, showing off the importance of drums, which might be the most important musical instrument, at least to my ears, in any well-done funeral doom band. providing all those dramatic accents to keep everything from just turning into sort of a sludgy drone, giving a structural skeleton to the music over which these floating lead guitars and crushing, droning rhythm guitars can snake their way through. And this shit's just so apocalyptic and heavy in a way that's almost hostile to the listener that it coexists perfectly with the weird black metal grindcore shit they do. Also, this section right here. That's probably my favorite set of riffs on the album. One of those sections that I always go back to and has kind of been consistently running through my head as the years have ground on. Also, these fucking vocals here, providing different voices for the different weird, metaphysical, spiritual characters and whatever odd fucking story they're trying to tell with this album. That shit's pretty fucked too. So the album starts out, establishes that you're gonna hear some black metal, you're gonna hear some grindcore, you're gonna hear some funeral doom. Usually those different styles are kind of sectioned off into their own areas, but as the album goes on towards its conclusion, they start getting mixed together more to where you get kind of a synthesis of all those styles coexisting within each individual riff by the end of the album. Like with the final song here, Eruliaf, this riff right here, I would argue, has elements of funeral doom and how it starts with the big but then it ties itself up with these chaotic black metal grindcore sounding bits. Also almost sounds like it's being played backwards, which is actually befitting of this song's concept. Eruliaf is failure spelled backwards, indicating that Amemnon has finally triumphed over the oppressive Kuoto. Here's another really weird bit where you got this riff that starts out with a big dissonant sort of chug that then ties itself up again with more chaotic black metal grindcore shit, leading into this lurching monstrosity of a musical section. Probably the most out there, outer space dissonant kind of sounding shit you're gonna hear over the course of the album, which then leads directly into a very triumphant sounding section. But even this more normal sounding stuff is still pulling off this weird stop-start sort of synthesis of funeral doom oppressive chug with more flowing sort of black metal. And again, it all almost sounds like it's being played backwards because it's Eruliaf. It's failure spelled backwards. Oh my god! They're tying together the song titles, the lyrical concepts, and the actual riffs themselves in a way that, honestly, I think is pretty fucking smart. Especially for, you know, a primitive war metal band. Probably why I like these guys a lot more than most other war metal bands. River of Corticon, can't recommend that album enough. If you're in the funeral doom, if you're into black metal, if you're into war metal, whatever the fuck, you gotta get that shit. It's so good. Sacramentary Abolishment did one more album before packing in favor of starting up their new band Axis of Advance, entitled The Distracting Stone. This one's actually a little bit more accessible than their first album, at least production-wise, which is funny because if you read interviews with them at the time, they were like, we actually spent way less at this studio. Kind of reminds me of what happened to At the Gates, where like their first album has this bonkers fucking bizarro sound to it that they had to spend a whole lot of money to get, and then their stuff going forward didn't cost nearly as much and sounded a lot more easy on the ears. Like as soon as this album starts, you can hear, okay, this is a much more normal black metal sounding kind of production. The riffs themselves, however, are still wacky Sacramentary Abolishment shit. I mean, after the customary explosion of guitar noise, you're basically getting a weirdo doom metal riff, which then leads into more chaotic stuff. So this is the end. But this time around, the catchiness factor is a little bit higher, mostly because you can hear what's going on a lot better. But I feel like even the more fast, chaotic parts of the album are ever so more consonantly epic melodic sounding than they were on River of Corticon. And that's considerably bolstered by the production. We also have a similar synthesis going on of the doomy and fast chaotic styles, where you get riffs that start out with like a real big stately chug and then wrap themselves up in more of a chaotic black metal manner. Also, check out this drum roll. Fucking nasty shit, dude. And then it goes into another awesome sort of epic melodic kind of riff. Again, a lot of it reminds me of the best of early Cataclysm, which I always feel have been critically underrecognized. But then this happens, and is that some fucking mellow death in my war metal? I mean, it's not straight in flames worship, but definitely not the sort of thing that you usually hear from a band that is labeled war metal. Then again, another war metal pioneer, Chuck Keller from Order from Chaos, went on to start up the bands Vulpecula and Ares Kingdom, so maybe the Melodeath stuff isn't really that far afield for war metal. Don't let the douchebag who gave the first Axis of Advance album a 0% review on Metal Archives hear you saying that, though.
Fortunately, the music of the greats of this obscure war metal genre never thought their music should be nothing but a Monomart the Crusher with faster and more chaotic drumming. If you like war metal or even straight up black metal, you're gonna find the riffs too cheesy and Gothenburg for your liking. The drumming makes the music sound a little bit too extreme for the kind of people that like that cheesy Gothenburg crap.
What a dork. God, I fucking hate war metal fans. Anyway, speaking of that drumming, Homeboy did incorporate one major new innovation into his style specifically for this album. Something that I like to call the Graveland Bounce, which is one of those things that's a bit hard to describe, but you know it when you hear it. It's sort of this weird undulating kind of thing that you hear in mostly a lot of Eastern European black metal like Master's Hammer or Druidic, or most notably Graveland when they do stuff like this. It goes like dun 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 dun. You take that sort of rhythmic style, you incorporate it into Sacramentary Abolishment, and you get really cool songs like Mist. Or at least you do once the screaming goats calm down a little bit. There we go, that's what I'm fucking talking about. It's even got an interesting little bit of clean guitar going on in the background. Clean guitar, 0 out of 10, fake war metal, worst band ever. Nah, for real though, that shit kicks ass, and it's really interesting when you juxtapose it with this super dark, straight ahead chaotic shit like right here. Also, Verminard's vocals on this album, fucking nasty, even grosser than on the first. And here's some weird fucking bouncy kind of melodic shit. Again, almost feels like it's being played backwards in a sense, before straightening itself out into more standard sounding melody, which then with an appropriately nasty vocal utterance leads us into some crazy kind of rolling triplet Cataclysm style blast beats, over which again they have those arcing melodic riffs. Much like its older sibling River of Corticon, this album features a really long kind of like epic song, but whereas Reassessment of Preliminary Defensive Procedures was entirely Funeral Doom, To Survive the Black Snow leans way harder into the synthesis of the doomy with the fast and chaotic. It starts off with another really cool iteration of their take on that undulating sort of Eastern European bouncy black metal beat, before then aggressively straightening itself out with a chaotic war metal reinterpretation of almost kind of a thrash beat, over which is laid at all times those nasty fucking vocals. I don't know how his throat survived recording this fucking album. Also, there's nasty fucking blast beats. And another cool, Northern Canadian Cataclysm-style hyperblast melodic section leading into some more of that absolutely melancholic and stately doom metal, complete with droning keyboards that makes your average war metal guy go, yeah, maybe I've been utilizing that drop too much. Point is, this shit's utterly unique for war metal and honestly most black metal as a whole. Nobody else really tapped into whatever you would call this kind of atmosphere quite the way that Sacramentary Abolishment did.
The cream of the crop! Nobody does it better.
And that's why I love them so much. Plus, they know when to go back into the fast, brutal shit at just the right time to keep the listener from getting bored. Like this triumphant reintroduction of tremolo picking. My initial plan for this episode way back when was to cover Axis of Advance and Sacramentary Abolishment all at once, but as you could tell, I found that I had so much shit to say about Sacramentary Abolishment, it had to be its own thing. So hopefully at some point in the future, look forward to getting an Axis of Advance episode to see where the musicians from this project went after Sacramentary Abolishment ended, post those two great albums. The drummer from Sacramentary Abolishment also had this band called Rights of Thy Der Gringolade that that I didn't really listen to too much before doing research for this episode, and that shit seems pretty cool too, so maybe at some point in the far future I'll do an episode on those guys. The main thing is Sacramentary Abolishment, fucking amazing if you like black metal or funeral doom or any kind of metal that has some fucking ballsack to it. Go get those 2 Sacramentary Abolishment albums because you're gonna love them. Hopefully you agree with me, but even if you didn't, thanks for listening or watching or whatever you did, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Now get the hell off my property, you son of a bitch!